And welcome everybody. This is our final session of Meet the New Critics, this time with Trish Altass. So we have met so far with all of the 8 Green MLAs in their new roles as critics with different portfolios than the one that they've been doing for the last couple of years, to get to know a little bit about their new portfolios, and to talk to you and get some advice about issues that you think that should be on their radar, that you'd like to see them working on during the next couple of years, as well as resources that you can point them to. Maybe there's some interesting ideas that you know are circulating or being done somewhere else in the world, things that Trish should look into and could maybe bring into her work. So before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that the land that we're gathered on is the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and that this land is known in the Mi'kmaq world as Epiquet, cradled on the waves. And so we're honored to be gathered here and able to do this work. I'm going to begin today by just kicking off the conversation, asking Trish a few questions. And then we're going to open it up to all of you for your input. So most of this hour is going to be focused on hearing from you, but some of the ways we'll set the scene here might help to stimulate some of the things you want to talk about. So, Trish, you know, we've known you for the last couple of years in your previous role with health and wellness, as well as fisheries and communities. And so before we start talking about your new role in economic growth and tourism and culture, I just wanted to ask you about your experience in your previous critic role. First of all, what did it teach you about being a critic in general?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Jordan, and thank you so much to everyone who's joined this discussion tonight. Certainly, health and wellness in particular is a huge portfolio, and it's complex. And you know, there was really a very steep learning curve in learning about all of the different aspects of that portfolio. But I think there are a few key takeaways I would say from that experience. Good governance and ensuring that it's clear, you know, who's responsible for what. That seems very simple, but was actually in many cases a very complex question. It was one of the main reasons that I brought forward amendments to the Health Services Act to try to help clarify some of those high level issues that, you know, trickle down to the rest of the healthcare system and make it very difficult for evidence-based planning to move forward in healthcare. So there's still so much work to do. And I know that Michelle Beaton is going to do a great job on that portfolio. If anyone does have any questions about anything in that as well, I'm happy to answer anything from my experience working in that area. It was certainly quite an all-encompassing portfolio. So I will say one of the recommendations I gave to Peter when we looked at shuffling the critic roles was that someone should really take that on as a single portfolio rather than having to, because there really wasn't a lot of time to delve into the issues in fisheries and communities, to be perfectly honest, because every day there was a new struggle, an issue to try to work through in health. The way I approached my work as a critic, and I will continue to do so, is to try to help the minister be the best minister they possibly can. I know that that's perhaps not the way we've traditionally looked at critic roles, but I think it's important that while we are challenging and asking difficult questions, we're also bringing forward ideas for how we can make improvements and what we would like, what the change that we'd like to see. So I will continue to approach my new role as the critic for economic growth, tourism, and culture in that same way.
Okay, thank you. And I guess your minister would of course be Matt McKay.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so in terms of this new critic role, why do you think you were picked for economic growth, tourism, and culture? Was this something that you were really gunning for, or is it a set of skills maybe that you might have or experience, or?
That's a really good question. I mean, I'm one of the few Greens in our caucus that has actually never run their own business, so it is a surprise in some ways. But the experience I do bring to this portfolio would be my work with unions and working with workers and doing research, looking at the experience, particularly of low-income workers, and exploring gender pay gaps and what
Hmm.
that could look like in different areas and how we can start to address some of those issues. So I think one of the things that has sometimes been overlooked by government in this area under this portfolio is the fact that labor does also fall under this portfolio. So,
Hmm.
we've brought forward as a caucus some important issues such as, paid sick days, trying to push for paid sick days for workers, particularly, during COVID, but it's something moving forward would really go a long way to improve the health and well-being of workers. Ensuring or working toward a living wage for workers. When people have enough to live and meet their basic needs, they live healthier. They experience less stress, and
Hmm.
we see a decrease of strain on our healthcare systems. And there's also a lot of research that shows that businesses who pay a living wage are, they can be more successful. They have workers who are more productive, and they're able to retain those workers longer over time. So there's a bit of a cultural sort of shift in the way we are approaching. I think this portfolio that we need to look at, what can we do to support our local small businesses, as well as ensuring that workers are able to live healthy, well, and strong, and be supported in their roles. So that I think that's why. Uh,
Okay, well, that sounds like a really good background to bring into the role. And I'm curious too, economic growth. This is something that Greens often, talk about that concept of economic growth, as we acknowledge that that's not something that infinite economic growth is not something that's possible or desirable, that we're already kind of living beyond probably a lot of our planetary boundaries. And I'm wondering how you sort of approach the concept of economic growth in this role from a green perspective.
Mhm. No, that's such a good point, Jordan, that we don't have endless resources that we can continue to draw from. We need to be looking at that balance of what we are taking from our natural environment and what we need to do to sustain the well-being of our citizens, of islanders. We are in a strange and interesting time right now in that there needs to be a plan moving forward for how we are going to recover coming out of COVID. So it's a challenging time, but it's also an incredible opportunity to rethink the way that we approach our economy uh, overall, and what is that plan and vision going to look like. So bringing forward some of those ideas that you just mentioned around what a green economy could look like, this is the time to do that. So I expect that quite honestly, my work in this role will involve some pretty in-depth discussions with the minister about what is the motive behind government's decisions? How will it impact that overall vision for our economy? And what outcomes are we trying to achieve? How
Hmm.
can we change things for the better? And I'm really looking forward to that. I think it's going to be an interesting challenge and an important time to have that discussion.
Yeah, no, that reminds me of an article I just saw this morning that was showing globally that only about a tenth of the funds that governments have been, releasing for COVID sort of stimulus measures have actually gone into green, a
Mm.
green recovery, whereas the rest have kind of gone into the opposite direction. So that was interesting. Um, so now I'm wondering if you can give us a sense of the full scope of your portfolio. So it's economic growth, tourism, and culture.
Mhm.
But what are the government's involvements in those different things? And So what kinds of, what kinds of agencies maybe are involved that you're going to be dealing with?
Right. So, there's a lot of federal crossovers, is what I'm learning in this department. So, different programs like Skills PEI, and how those different programs interact with federal funding, and trying to determine sort of which programs are working well for Islanders and what are the outcomes, intended outcomes, for those programs. Also, things like Innovation PEI and the Cultural Action Plan are also under this portfolio. So, looking at moving forward, are our island artists, supported in the long term? We know that it was been a very challenging time for artists in particular, during COVID. So, are there actually, legislative changes that we can put in place to help support and protect artists on our island? So that's something that we are starting to look at. As
Hmm.
well, there was a discussion around the Temporary Foreign Workers Protection Act. So we did bring forward some concerns around some shortfalls that were in the original draft, and that was based on feedback provided by the Cooper Institute, and organizations like CUPE that have been doing some work on this nationally. So I'll be sort of the lead on ensuring that those amendments are move forward, and that the draft is going to do what it needs to do to protect our temporary foreign workers. And that's something that I've brought forward in a few different ways, actually, the well-being of temporary foreign workers, since being elected. As well, as I mentioned, labor. So looking at issues like the gender wage gap, we do have, one of the smallest gender wage gaps in the country, but there's a few different reasons for that.
Hmm.
We do have a lot of women who work in the public service, and we have men who are working for lower paid jobs at a higher number than in other provinces. So there's a few things to look at there, and it's still an issue that we need to take seriously. So we're looking at some ways to hopefully start to address those issues, as well as improve our diversity representation in different areas, and ensure that there's equal pay across all diversity groups working in different areas of employment. So we're looking at a few different things, legislative changes possibly. We will be doing some consulting on that. So it's early days for me to talk about that today, but those are some of the key areas that we are exploring.
Okay.
Mhm.
And so then finally, I'm wondering what parts of this portfolio do you feel that you have the most to learn about? What's going to involve the steepest learning curve for you?
I think there's definitely a lot that I do need to learn, and one of the things that I've always brought to this, my role as an MLA, is taking the time to learn in many different ways, right? So um, learning through best practices across the country, as well as engaging with professionals in different areas, and particularly unions. So since taking on this role, I've been trying meeting with most of the unions involved with the Federation of Labor to find out a little bit more about different sectors. But certainly, I think the best ways to target programs to support our small local businesses, and challenging, whether or not the approach to economic growth that we currently, favor in most areas is going to is successful at doing that. And I think that that's starting from that place, and then trying to learn what more we can do to focus our efforts on those small businesses is something that I think will be very important.
Okay. Thank you. So I think now we're ready to open it up, and we would like to hear from those of you who have joined us today. So we're a pretty small group, but you can if to just get on a speakers list sort of, and indicate you want to speak, you can either raise your hand if you know how to do that, or you can use the chat. Just stick an asterisk in the chat just to indicate that you'd like to speak. I'm going to be taking down notes from what everybody says to share with Trish afterwards, but I'm also going to share the link in the chat, which I just did, to an idea board that I created. So this is where I'm going to be putting the notes, but I encourage you to also add any notes of yours if you just prefer to put it on the idea board. And we'll actually leave this idea board active, for several days after today, like at least until the beginning of next week, so that if there's anything that kind of comes into your mind after today, then you can put them in there too. But we'd really love to hear your thoughts right now. What are some important things that you hope that Trish can take a look at or work on in the next little while? Do you have any experience, maybe in business or arts or culture or tourism? Lynn, would you like to speak?
No.
Oh, sorry, I thought.
Ron, no, I just, well, I was looking for the raise the hand thing, actually. Ron, I'd like to talk because as we know, Ron is the talker.
Okay, go ahead, Ron.
Oh, it's nice to have so much support. Hey, Trish.
Hey, Ron.
Hi, how you doing?
Good.
One of the things that I really wonder about, we're fairly new to the island. We've been here just over 4 years. And we came from two of the richest provinces in the country, Ontario and British Columbia, very strong economy. And what I found here is that the labor standards seem to be fairly out of date when it comes to like hours of work, overtime, those kinds of things. And I'm wondering, is it just because of the resistance to change that is inherent with Islanders? Not that that's a bad thing, but we all know it's there. Or is it something that has been planned, or is it something that you're going to be looking at? Because 48 hours before overtime that hasn't been a standard in the country for 40 years, and yet it's still here. And low minimum wages. I know we have a smaller economy to support the wage earner. There's going to be discrepancies here and there, but friends of mine from other provinces that want to come here to work are saying, how can you guys afford to live there on those kinds of wages unless you have, as you mentioned, sort of alluded to earlier, a union job? You're going to end up in a fairly low paying job. And it's with the way that the prices have gone, especially over the last year and a half during COVID, we've seen, an increase in prices, a lot of it because of problems with the supply chain. But I can't see those prices going down very much in the near future. So I'm wondering if you're looking at possibly addressing those discrepancies and out-of-date pieces in the legislation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for that, Ron. Absolutely, you're right. Our standard for for hours of overtime and is certainly out of line with the rest of the country, and it's something we do need to look at. It is concerning that it's getting harder and harder for your average Islander to be able to get by financially. I mean, oh, am I frozen?
No. Oh, maybe she's frozen now. Uh-oh, she'll be back.
Now, how could she be frozen? It's 30 degrees outside.
Yeah, well, only the internet did that. Oh, she's able to chat with us. She said, sorry, I seem to have frozen. Okay, it looks like she's coming back.
Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, I froze there. I don't know what happened, but
No
I'm back. Okay, so I'm not sure where I got cut off, but I will just say that, yes, Ron, you bring up a very important point. It is very concerning that it's harder and harder for your average Islander to make ends meet. I mean, we look at our the challenges in the housing market that someone making minimum wage just can't possibly afford to buy a house on PEI these days. So as I mentioned sort of earlier, when we look at what are the impacts of paying a worker a living wage, the the impact on their stress and mental and well-being and their health, those are very clear, but there are also significant impacts for our system, in that it's, it's very expensive for people. It's very expensive for our system to support people to live in poverty, to be honest. Poverty makes people sick, we know that, and when people can't meet their basic needs, there are significant impacts, and we really need to look at what we need to do to ensure everybody can live healthy, well, and strong as a baseline. And part of that does involve making sure that people are making a living wage and that our labor standards are fair and reasonable. So I think we do have a long way to go, and we will definitely be looking at that. Ron, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ron. And I see that Pauline just made a comment about poor internet being a major barrier to development.
Yes,
and that does fall under.
It does. I forgot to mention that, but yes, it does. So yes, the internet and the expansion of fiber and high-speed internet and all of that is under my portfolio. So I can tell you that in my own district, it's something that has come up quite a bit. We have a very unequal access in many areas, particularly in the more western parts of my district. So I know that this is an issue for many islanders. And when you are in a situation where you're trying to work from home, many people, or you need to go to school and access the internet to take your classes, it's been very hard for folks, and that's not likely to change in the near future. We're going to need that access, so we need to move it forward, and there's still a lot of work to be done there, that's for sure.
Yeah, thank you. So we've got Selvi is up next. Go ahead, Selvi.
Thanks, Jordan. Thanks also for your responses there, Trish. Wouldn't expect anything less from you of us. So here's what's been playing on my mind, and it's a great opportunity for me to raise that up with you here. Much of the funding that the government outlaid for economic development, there is evidence, not just in Canada, but also across the world, that much of the development has gone towards, say, concrete infrastructure, and that has in effect only raised the greenhouse effects and not reduced carbon emissions. And so I would look at your thoughts on what kind of, you've already mentioned economic growth that's balanced, that's looking at health and well-being of people, and looking at a basic guaranteed income is what you're supporting. Is also we want to promote tourism, we want to promote culture, and PEI, of course, is known as the welcoming island, and tourism is one of our biggest industry. We want the ferries, we want the ships, but we also want the ocean and sea life to be protected. We want our whales to be protected. We want, where do you see a balance, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you, Selvi. There's so much to unpack there, but we'll start with tourism, because now is such a good time to ask just those questions, right? Like, what do we want our tourism industry to look like in the future? And we've relied on things like, cruise ships and some, perhaps some approaches to tourism that are not going to be as successful in the future. And we're going to have to look at that quite critically. There are people who have brought forward some really innovative ideas around tourism, so empowering new ways to look at how we can share our PEI culture with people who want to come and visit in a safe and sustainable way. And I think it's going to take those sort of opportunities for innovative ideas to come forward, rather than just sort of sticking with the same traditional ways that we've approached tourism over years and years and years. So it's one of those things where this could be a time to really make those changes, and that's something that we'll be trying to champion, is supporting those innovative approaches in tourism. You also mentioned the investment in concrete infrastructure, and I think that's a really interesting point. We did see that with some of the funding that came forward from the federal government and how it was accessed and chosen to be used for what needed to be shovel-ready projects. And it was actually quite telling, I think, as to what projects were shovel-ready by this government. And it was mostly, paving roads, a lot of paving. And there are so many other ways that we could have utilized that funding and that opportunity, and looking at, what are our long-term goals. Would have been, I didn't see a lot of evidence of that. So we have, a lot of work to do there as well, for sure.
All right, thank you, Sylvie, for bringing up those good points and questions. I see Pauline was asking about if the Green Party of PEI has an economic vision for PEI, and that's kind of a very big question. But I don't know, Trish, if what's your vision for the next 10 years or so for PEI?
It's a very big question. It's a huge question, and it's a critical question. So it's what you should expect to see from any political party, I would say, moving into the next election, is to have a comprehensive 10-year vision of what it is, what economic development should look like. It's something that is an ongoing conversation for us. And so this, conversations like this really help to build toward that, but there's certainly a lot we will be looking for in government's plan that really should be, we should be seeing it, we should have seen it already, but we haven't seen any real comprehensive plan on a post-COVID recovery. So I think it's a very fair question, and it is something that we are continuing to work on. So I'm definitely open to further suggestions on this, but it won't just come from me as an individual critic. This would be something that would be in collaboration with the party and our caucus overall, to have that bold vision, long-term vision for PEI. So, I'm really excited by some of the policy work that's happening within the Green Party, that we're seeing opportunities for members to bring forward, policies and ideas. And I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next out of those conversations. And it's something that I'm looking forward to seeing how that continues, because it's not an easy answer, and we do need to work on this together, and I won't be developing it on my own, that's for sure.
Okay, thank you. And I see Kathy just put a comment in there about really needing to have a look at the pros and cons of cruise ships. She says, we survived here for years without their visits. The damage the cruise ships cause to the environment really needs to be balanced with the benefit. We can't survive here without clean oceans and our fish and sea life. So hard decisions are needed. And I'm not sure if you want to comment on that, Trish.
I really appreciate that comment, Kathy. And it's such a difficult situation, because we have, as a province, allowed our tourism industry in particular, and service industries, to become so dependent on that cruise ship traffic, without ever questioning what are the environmental impacts. Are we contributing in a negative way to harm? It's not something that I think has ever seriously been asked. And as we build back, as we decide what our tourism industry should look like in the future, that's exactly the type of question we should be asking. So I thank you for bringing that forward. And I believe that our caucus is well positioned to bring forward those difficult questions that, people haven't been comfortable or willing to ask. And there will be pushback. When you ask a question like that, there's going to be pushback. But we're going to have to bring forward things that not everybody's going to like. And I think that this will be an important question moving forward.
Okay, thank you. So we continue to be open to anything that you might want to bring up. We haven't talked, so we just had our first little foray into tourism. We haven't talked really about the arts and culture very much. Actually, you know, one thing that I was reminded of earlier when you were speaking, Trish, was that Hannah Bell's very first private members bill was actually one that included the cultural sector as a strategic sector under the Innovation PEI Act.
Right.
Made that sector eligible for funding and other kinds of supports. So the Green Party has a strong record on this already. Is there anything more that you'd like to say about the cultural sector right now, which has also been very, very hard hit alongside tourism and is actually part of our tourist sector? What do you see as the challenges and maybe some potential ways in which the government could aid that sector?
Well, I think it's going to take further engagement with the cultural sector to answer that question fully. But one of the things that we have been considering would be legislation that exists in some other jurisdictions, status of the artist legislation that would help to empower and ensure support for artists. So again, it's very early days, but we are certainly open to bringing forward perhaps some legislation that would strengthen the position of artists in the cultural sector. And again, though there's still a lot of consultation that needs to happen on that, but we're not afraid to bring forward legislative changes if needed to make that happen. So.
Well, that sounds really interesting. That would benefit a lot of people on PEI. It looks like Ron or Lynn has a hand up.
Oh, I think you're muted there, Ron.
You're still muted. Yeah.
There we
Oh,
go.
here we go.
Hello. To quote from Monty Python, and now for something completely different. Trish, as you know, we have a nonprofit that we run, and there are dozens of nonprofits all across the island. COVID has literally kicked the you-know-what out of us with the restrictions on how we raise funds and how we operate and everything else. And I'm just wondering, with economic development and the associated groups that go with it, how can we incorporate the existing nonprofits across the island into our economic strategies? Because of the support that we give to the economy throughout the island, whether it's getting a corporate donation from somebody. Obviously, if the corporation isn't doing well, then they are reluctant to donate. Or how do we go back and give back to our communities and that kind of stuff? Is there any kind of strategy, or can there be a strategy where the nonprofits can actually look at even possibly maybe being able to get government funding to some type of degree, where we don't have to literally go hat in hand to the public all the time? Is there some type of safety net for the different groups out there?
So it sounds like, Ron, what you're sort of talking about would be stable core like funding for not-for-profits, so that year after year, that there's going to be a base funding. And that's something that we have actually brought forward quite a bit. Not myself, but I know Hannah has spoken about this and worked on this. So I think it's incredibly important that not-for-profits that are doing valuable work for our community, as yours does, Ron, would have the opportunity to be able to get regular funding, core funding, so that they're not sort of playing guessing games about whether or not you're going to, as you reapply for different grants, different whatever, you are able to plan for the future because there is some stable funding there. So it is very important. And it's, I see that Pauline has made a note that Lobe would be a good person to check with on this. So I know Lobe, and I will definitely reach out to him. But Ron, I'd be open to hearing about as well, from your experience, what would be the most helpful things for government to do to be able to support a not-for-profit like your business, the Emergency Animal Rescue?
Yeah, I think it's it's like, as you say, if we knew that there was some form of even very base income that we could rely on from year to year to year, because right now, you know, all these places are running 50-50s and online lotteries and online auctions and everything else. And it's literally a crapshoot to see if we're going to be able to survive. We're going to be able to expand. And the services we provide are mostly complementary services to existing commercial services, so that, you know, we can be integrated right into the whole economic structure and still not be a burden on the economy, or perceived burden on the economy, if we can know that somewhere down the road there just might be a little bit of cash flow that we can access.
Mm-hmm. And again, I see a note from Pauline there. So I know that Hannah, as well as our whole caucus, has been successful in advocating for that core funding for some organizations. We've put that forward in our budget ask to government, and there has been some progress. But you know, clearly, you know, hearing from you, Ron, that there's still work to do on this. So I appreciate you bringing that forward, and it's something that we would definitely continue to work on.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Trish.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I believe I remember that you know, a couple of years ago, when this nonprofit network was kind of getting rolling, Hannah brought up the point that the nonprofit sector would actually be, I think, maybe like the third largest industry on PEI, when you look at all of the people who are employed in that sector. So it's pretty big.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And important, you know, not just for our economy, but for our communities and for Islanders. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll continue to take questions. We still have another 20 minutes. And actually, you know, one thing that I wanted to ask you about, Trish, because this is a theme that's come up in quite a few of our conversations with MLAs, is the degree to which you know, every portfolio is interconnected with so many other different portfolios, and actually should be, you know, more formally and, you know, connected and collaborating with different portfolios. So I'm wondering, what other portfolios and, you know, departments do you see your portfolio of economic development or economic growth, tourism, and culture interacting with the most, and needing to work with the most in order to achieve the vision maybe that's forming in your mind for how things should go forward?
That's a really interesting question, and not something I have thought of in that particular way. I can say that in looking at issues around labor, that, you know, there are workers in all different types of sectors that have overlapping, in many cases, issues and challenges. So I don't know if I would say at this point, that's the first thing that comes to mind, because we have been looking at a few different issues around, you know, paid sick days and living wage, and, you know, what can we do around, you know, pay transparency and equality for workers. And that, you know, that branches over into all different areas. I mean, for example, as the health critic, it became quite clear that you know, regular engagement, meaningful engagement with our healthcare unions is something that has really been lacking, and is causing a lot of issues within our healthcare system. We saw it with the mobile mental health units. We saw it with the situation at Prince County with the emergency room and nurses, and were nurses going to be staffing, you know, certain roles, or paramedics, or how that was going to play out. So one thing I am keeping an eye on is, you know, how we are engaging with unions in the public sector, as well as our publicly funded institutions. And I think that crosses over into many portfolios. But again, I think it's an area that you know, can be overlooked, particularly when, you know, for example, the portfolio that labor falls under it's not in the name. It's not recognized. The focus is on economic growth as the priority. And as you highlighted, that's perhaps definitely a different way to look at our economy than the Green Party would do. So yeah, so that doesn't really answer your question, but it's where my work has been focused so far. So
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Labor is going to cross into lots of other portfolios. And I guess my other question would be then about poverty elimination. I
Mm,
believe there's been some talk about, making sure that a specific minister, and not necessarily the Minister for Social Development and Housing,
mhm.
is in charge of the poverty reduction file. As we now have accountability, we have targets, and the government has to have a plan and report on this. Thanks to Hannah's
Mhm.
legislation earlier this year. So I'm wondering if that's how much of that do you think will interact with your portfolio, given the labor standards and the minimum wage and things like that.
Absolutely. I think that there will be a close connection there. As we mentioned, when you are islanders who are working minimum wage or working in precarious employment or seasonal employment, part-time jobs. We have people working multiple part-time jobs and still not being able to meet their basic needs. So absolutely, there is a crossover, and ensuring that our businesses, particularly our small businesses, are able to thrive and to pay workers, a living wage. It's not how we've really, I think, as a province looked at the economy, and I think that we need to shift our focus more toward making sure everyone can live healthy and well, and that definitely involves reducing and eliminating poverty. Eliminating, that is the goal. So yeah, I think there's crossover for sure.
Okay, thank you. I see that Pauline has her hand up. So go ahead, Pauline.
Yeah, Trish, part of that living healthy and well
Mhm.
is people being able to partake in their community. And when people cannot even get a schedule for their work schedule, say a week in advance, to be able to plan, to attend meetings, to be community volunteers, they can't participate fully in society. And I think that there should be a regulation that employers are required to present a schedule in a timely fashion, so that workers can be make their schedules with childcare and then the dentist appointments, whatever is going on with their life, and not just having to worry about doing all of that once their work schedule comes out. I think that would be a fairly easy change and would impact the lives of a lot of people on PEI.
That's a really interesting point, Pauline, and I really appreciate you bringing that forward. That's something I'm going to look into further. I hadn't really, no one has framed it that way for me yet, but you make such a valid point, particularly for those who are navigating situations like their own perhaps healthcare challenges, or caring for their children, or elder care. We know that particularly women are often balancing all those different roles. So the simple act of knowing what your schedule is going to be with advance notice is certainly seems very reasonable, and would, I'm sure, have a significant impact. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, Pauline. I know I've had a number of times, where I've talked to somebody, and there's I'm waiting for my schedule to even know what I can do or can't do. So that could be a huge change.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you or anybody else here is familiar with legislation of that kind in other parts of Canada.
I'm not familiar.
Okay, well,
I'm not sure either, but I will definitely have a look. We'll do a scan and see what's out there, and
yeah,
yeah.
Thanks.
scan time.
We on
Absolutely.
PEI are particularly vulnerable to this because of our industries. Our
Mhm.
tourism and our retail is a big part of our development, or of our economy, as opposed to Ontario, for example, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So as a percentage of the population, we're quite impacted by that. If you
Mhm.
Google the new topic, if you Google green tourism on PEI,
Mhm.
what comes up is golf courses and Anne of Green Gables.
Right.
So it looks like we don't have a green tourism product on Prince Edward Island.
Hmm.
And I think that that is a shame. And the one small part that could change, I mean, we could have a certification program like many places do. One be in Scotland, another Costa Rica, another one Ireland, for example. But when TIPI or whoever it is that goes out to do the ratings on tourist accommodation, there's absolutely nothing in those standards that indicate green tourism. So for example, if you wanted to have a 5-star accommodation rating, or sorry, I think they number it. So if you want to get a 5 for your tourist accommodation, which is the highest one that you can get, you need to have your driveway paved.
Right. That is such an interesting idea, Pauline. Do you happen to know if any of the other Atlantic provinces have already like a green tourism sort of certification, as like you were describing?
I do not.
Okay, that's something I want to look into, because if not, I mean, it's a great idea anyway, but it could be a wonderful opportunity for us to, you know, stand out and really, you know, sort of develop a niche market that would be wonderful for our economy and for the environment here in PEI. So I think this is a wonderful idea. Another one I'm going to look into, Pauline. Thank you.
Okay. Now,
Pauline, you're on fire, you know?
so that actually ties into golf courses, Trish, which also ties into the Water Act and water regulations.
Right.
Like, there's no reason why we can't have green golf courses, and they do exist in the world. I can't name any because I'm not a golfer.
Yep.
But that's something that I think we should be pushing the government to take action on, especially given that the farmers there's a big pushback that the farmers feel like they're attacked, and they keep saying, what about the golf courses?
Yeah.
So I do believe that the golf courses should be encouraged to go green.
That's a really interesting point as well. And that piece about, you know, what can government to encourage that, do to encourage that? And I think that's a good way to look at it also. So yeah, Pauline, you've got lots of great ideas. I've got a list now I've got to look into. So thank you so much.
Actually, the government owns a lot of our golf courses.
They do, exactly. Yes. Yeah. So that's a good point too.
And Trish, I know that this is the sustainable golf courses. That's something that Susan Hartley has been interested in. So you should talk to her, because she probably knows a lot more about that.
That's a really good point. I know that I've discussed this with her before, and I believe we do have one sustainable golf course on PEI, at least, I think. I feel like that's something she was telling me. But anyway, I will look into that further as well. I'm not an expert in golf. I'm not going to lie. I've only ever golfed twice, and it's since I became a politician. So I don't know, but it's a very good point. And we have a lot of golf courses on the island, and as you say, you know, there are several that are owned by the government. So
yeah.
The other thing that's a crossover between agriculture and economic development is actually tourism and agriculture. And we see that being developed here on like Farm Day in the city and Farm Day, where you could go to visit farms. And I was recently talking to a friend of mine who used to go to a farm camp in northern Maine. She's from the States. And that was something that they looked forward to every summer, and they would go and actually help the farmers on these farm camps. So that could be like part of the development of a green tourism product that overlaps with agriculture.
Yeah, very interesting.
And gives our farmers another revenue stream.
And that would be a really good example of sort of, you know, how can we support innovative and new ideas in tourism that we haven't tried before, right? So as we build back our tourism sector, looking at how can government support innovative ideas like that, I think will be very important.
Yeah, and I know that there are a lot of farmers on PEI that are always looking for an extra hand, probably any time of the year, but especially in the summer and and the fall, the busy times. So
I want to note, if I could, in the chat, I see Kathy has mentioned that labor seems to be the one department that government doesn't know what to do with. And Kathy, yes, that is how I feel also. I can tell you that in 2015, under the McLaughlin government, I remember exactly when they moved labor from being a part of, like a name part in a portfolio, and I can't remember exactly what it was. I'm blanking on that.
Workforce and advanced learning, I believe it was.
That's what it changed to. So they took labor out and changed it to workforce and advanced learning. So, and since then we've seen a further separation where even workforce is not actually part of the sort of the title of a portfolio. And that seems like a simple thing, but it actually does take away a lot of the sort of focus on that area. So I was actually at a CUPE convention because I was a former CUPE member when this happened. And I remember getting up to the mic and talking about that, you know, we really need to work with unions and ensure that, you know, people are able to unionize. And one of the things that I did advocate for and that was changed quite early in since being elected was a change to the Labor Act for first contract arbitration, which is something that exists in every other province and we now have here. But basically that when a union is trying to form a new union, that if the process goes very poorly, they can file for arbitration before the union's actually formed, which helps to move the process along. So, so that's just one example where I do think that we should be, you know, that labor is an important part of our economy and our society. That's organized labor, but also all of our workers, that we need to take into consideration that, you know, workers need to be paid a living wage, and you know, we have a pretty big gap from that right now for many people. So.
Okay, yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Kathy. We still have a few minutes if there's anything else that anybody would like to raise. Okay, not seeing anybody right yet, but Trish, before we go, you know, and I know you're brand new in the portfolio, but is there anything that that you could share with us today that's maybe something that you're looking at doing as far as maybe bringing forward to the fall?
Yeah, so, you know, again, it is, as you said, that we're still early days, but I sort of highlighted a few areas where we might be looking at, we're looking at some legislation, and we will be reaching out for consultation on some pieces. For example, legislation that might work to help to encourage pay transparency and equity for workers is something we're looking at. So that's pretty vague at this point, but you know, you will hear more on sort of next steps soon, I expect. One of the things I've you know, it seems obvious, but as an MLA, you know, we are in a position to amend legislation and to bring forward legislation, and we're the only ones, you know, who can do that. So it takes time to do that well. And it needs to be very well thought out with effective consultation. And I do think it's important to recognize that that's something only we can do. So we will be looking at opportunities in this portfolio, and we've flagged 2 or 3 that could move forward. So I encourage you to please stay tuned and you know, participate if you can in future consultation. Because there is work to be done, and I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, thank you very much, Trish. I think unless there's, and I see Selvy's clapping, or was that a hand raise? Unless anybody raises their hand.
Definitely clapping.
Yeah, that's clapping. Okay, thank you, Selvy. So I think we'll end it there. So thank you everybody for participating and for all your ideas. I will send out the recording as well as the link to the idea board to all of you and everybody else who registered today. So if there's anything else that you maybe didn't get a chance to say today, or that you think of in the middle of the night. Oh, I should have said that. Well, it's not going to be too late. You can get it on the board, and all these notes will go to Trish. And you know, in pretty much every one of these conversations that we've had, there have been ideas, such as some of the ideas that have come up tonight, that have caused the critic to go, wow, you know, I'm going to look into that, and there could really be some changes coming out of these things. So these ideas are very, very important. You are talking to one of the 27 people in the entire province who's capable of bringing forward new legislation. So thank you,
Yeah.
and wish you all a very, very good night.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. And yeah, as Jordan said, please don't hesitate to share any ideas, or if you want to contact me directly, that you can definitely do that too anytime. So I'm looking forward to continuing these discussions. Thanks, everyone.
I'll include Trish's email in the email I send you all too. Okay, thanks all. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.